Dog that barks. Birthday today. Playing the ukulele. What do these have in common? They're all sentence fragments that I used to grab your attention. Did it work? My name is Elizabeth Wilden, and I've been researching the art of the intentional sentence fragment. Like me, many of the students in this class are writers or wish to teach writing. Many students are taught to avoid fragments at all costs, but they are beginning to have an acceptable place in writing. Today, I'll discuss the basics of sentence fragments, scholarly opinions on their increasing presence in writing, as well as my own findings from my corpus. So, what are fragments? Catherine Emmett defines a fragment as a phrase or clause that is punctuated like a sentence, but cannot be classified as a complete sentence due to missing parts. For example, the second sentence on this slide is a fragment because it does not have a subject. According to Robin Simmons, the 5 most common types of fragments are subordinate clauses, participle phrases, afterthoughts, lonely verbs, and appositives. This sentence is a lonely verb fragment because its verb does not have a corresponding subject. Sentence fragments like this are usually considered errors, but what's the harm in using them? Many scholars have addressed this controversy. Some push back against challenging traditional grammar while others encourage it. The latter group is known as descriptivists, as opposed to prescriptivists. Descriptivists are fascinated with the idea that language is not stagnant. It changes and develops throughout time. Deborah Dean maintains that shifting perspectives is essential to teaching grammar. Edgar Schuster, a descriptivist, believes that writers should be thinking in terms of effectiveness rather than grammar. He argues that fragments express the same ideas as sentences and do so in fewer words. So, fragments may not be as problematic as they seem. Amber Simmons, an English language arts teacher in Georgia, encourages her students to explore the stylistic effects of sentence fragments. When someone challenges the use of a fragment in writing, she counters with 3 questions. 1. Does the fragment hinder your ability to comprehend its meaning? 2. Is the fragment purposeful or accidental? And 3. How does the fragment affect your perception of the text? More times than not, the fragment does not intrude on comprehension, it is purposeful, and it adds a layer of emphasis and meaning to the text. This prompts the question, how can fragments be used to create such stylistic effects? According to Jeff House, grammar is an expression of style, an invitation to the writer to explore how to create a distinctive voice. Thus, using fragments as a grammatical choice is simply a means of expressing style and voice. Edgar Schuster proposes 7 rules to guide writers towards effectively using fragments for style. Such tips include adding periods for a dramatic pause, posing questions as fragments for naturalness and economy, and deleting the subject or predicate of a clause for emphasis and succinctness. In addition to my scholarly research, I conducted my own study of fragments with a corpus. I looked at 3 of Sherman Alexie's young adult novels, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, Flight, and The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven. I selected random pages of each book and searched for sentence fragments. I noticed that fragments and sentences are extremely prevalent in these novels, more so than Alexie's adult fiction. Of the 18 pages I analyzed, there were, on average, 25 sentences per page, of which 4 were fragments. Often, 2 or more fragments appeared in a row, which I call clusters. I noticed a total of 10 fragment clusters. The fact is, Sherman Alexie uses fragments a lot. Here is an example from Flight. My mother died of breast cancer when I was 6. I remember a few things about her: her voice, her red hair, and the way she raised one eyebrow when she laughed. The grammatically correct choice would be placing a colon before the list, but Alexie chose to separate it as its own sentence. Is this okay? I will refer back to Simmons' 3 questions. Does the fragment hinder your ability to comprehend its meaning? No, the reader can still easily comprehend that the list refers to attributes that the narrator misses about his mother. Is the fragment purposeful or accidental? In consideration that this novel underwent hours of editing, yes, this was purposeful. How does the fragment affect your perception of the text? I think that the resulting dramatic pause really emphasizes the love and grief that the main character is still experiencing years after his mother's death. Using a colon just wouldn't have the same emotional effect, which is likely why Alexi chose to write it this way. Next, in The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven, the main character describes a Christmas where his father could not afford to buy any presents. But there were no gifts. Not one. This is an example of one of Schuster's rules. Isolate negatives as fragments to give them additional emphasis. This allows the reader to sympathize with the narrator's dejection. In another section of the book, Alexi writes, "These books had all kinds of horrible injuries. Hands and feet smashed in printing presses, torn apart by lawnmowers, burned and dismembered. Faces that had gone through windshields, dragged over gravel, split open by garden tools." This is an example of the fragment clusters that I was talking about. I like this excerpt because it shows that fragmented sentences don't necessarily have to be short. This isn't a positive fragment. It describes the injuries, and the descriptions are very embellished. Now I will turn to fragments in The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. This example takes place at a funeral for the narrator's sister. As the coffin settled into the dirt, it made this noise, almost like a breath, like a sigh, like the coffin was settling down for a long, long nap, for a forever nap. Like the previous example, this is a fragment cluster. Notice the repetition with the word like. Using fragments like this helps the reader feel the emotion that surrounds the sister's burial. This is my final example. We made it to the top. Well, almost to the top. This excerpt really captures the main character's voice. It's exactly how you'd expect a 14-year-old boy to sound, especially in the form of a diary. Clearly, Sherman Alexie is deliberate in using fragments for stylistic effect. He uses sentence fragments intentionally to create emphasis, meaning, and voice. Historically, scholars and teachers have scorned the use of sentence fragments, but as the English language develops, it allows us to reconsider the potential value of fragments. I will leave you with a quote. As Amber Simmons stated, "We must look at grammar as a way of creating, not fixing."